It's Mike Commito. He's author of Bruins 365, a really, really interesting book, a fun read. He sent us a digital copy, and it was really fun to see some of the old names. And it goes through all 365 days of the year with Bruins memories. And Mike, really good to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, sure. And so, first off, I guess what made you come up with the idea of, you've done some other teams. What made you come up with the idea of doing it in this type of format?
Yeah, it goes back quite a ways because I got into writing about hockey history and doing social media stuff with hockey history probably about 10 years ago, and I started to build up this portfolio of articles that I was writing, and I think the tidbits I was sharing on Twitter with these daily moments on this day in such and such in hockey history was doing well, and it was kind of coalesced while I was on a beach in Mexico in March break, and I was reading a hockey book. I was reading Val James's book about his career and being the first American-born Black player to play in the NHL. And I said, I read so much hockey books. I want to write a hockey book. What kind of hockey book could I write about? And I thought maybe the stuff I was doing online with these daily moments, maybe there's a book there. And that honestly kind of became the germ of the idea that became the Hockey 365 series. On the way back home, on the plane, I was scribbling out an outline. I got home, got an agent, sold the book deal, wrote the first book. We did a couple books like that were just really focused on general hockey history. And then we started doing team specific books in 2023. So started with the Leafs, did the Habs, and then now the Bruins, which I think is quite logical if you think about those teams and the rivalry and the history between those clubs. It was kind of a no-brainer for me when the time came to do the latest book. The publisher had actually thrown out, maybe you should do a Wings 365 next. But I said, no, if we're going to keep this series going, I know exactly which team we're going to do. And it's for me, it's got to be the Bruins.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. How long does it actually take you to research and gather all the information to put together something like this? To find all the different tidbits, over for the whole year.
It pretty much takes a year. You're spending the better part of a year doing the research, doing the writing, putting it all together. And then, you do the editing and you start to get it where you want it with the publisher. But it takes a lot of work, and it's about sticking to a schedule because, you've got 365, and I mean, it's 365, but there's 366 because I always include a story for leap years. And so, but it's fun. I mean, it allows me to kind of dig into team histories, especially teams that maybe I'm not as familiar with as a fan of the game. I don't hide it that I'm a Leafs fan. Again, if you guys have perused the digital copy, that I say that I think the first sentence in the book.
Yeah.
But that doesn't stop me from appreciating, the Bruins history and everything they've done within the league and what they've accomplished. And certainly I think that's part of the reason why I picked the Bruins, is because I'm in Sudbury, Ontario in Canada, and there's a lot of Bruins history in my community. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to do that. So it definitely takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to find those stories and corroborate the dates and make sure that you've got enough information and to find a story for that day. But honestly, once you get it all together and you're able to kind of release it into the wild, it really makes it all worth it.
Now, being a Leafs fan and not really having, a ton of Bruins background, was there a little fact or a little tidbit you found that was kind of your favorite kind of little memory that maybe you didn't know about and you thought was pretty unique and interesting?
Yeah, there was I think especially with the Bruins book, and again, I'll say that with the Habs book as well, like for me, the things that I always appreciate is learning more about the players that would not have been household names for me. Like certainly, the Ray Borks, the Bobby Orrs, the Charas, the Bergerons, like these are all players that loom large in hockey history that I think, regardless of what your stripes are, like, who those guys are and what they meant to their club. But for me to, appreciate some of the third and fourth line grinders who, I didn't necessarily grow up with, like learning about them and understanding what they did and how they contribute in ways. Like I always loved those moments, but there were certainly a few moments when I go through the book and I was doing the research, and there was players I'd never even heard about before. And one of them was actually Lionel Hitchman, who was the first Bruin to have his number retired. He was number 3. And like I learned about him because the editor who was editing my book had edited somebody else's book, her name is Patricia, and she's the granddaughter Lionel Hitchman, and she wrote a book about him as part of her campaign to try to get him recognized by the Hockey Hall of Fame. And what I appreciated about him was just like all the stuff that he did off the ice. Like, he was a great defenseman. He was actually one of the reasons why Eddie Shore was able to do what he did, because Hitch was kind of the stay-at-home guy and allowed Eddie Shore to run and gun and do all the things that Eddie Shore did. But he was also very skilled at piano. He set fly fishing records. He wrote poetry. He kept a pet bear, which is probably my favorite part about, his things he did off the ice. But it's things like that where, like, again, I think a lot of Bruins fans, if you've been to the Garden, you've seen number 3 in the rafters. You may not remember Hitch, though, because, again, like, he played in the 30s. But again, I think it's digging into those players, learning more about somebody like Hitch, who, despite the fact that his number is retired, maybe he hasn't really gotten his full due, by the franchise or by the hockey history community in general.
Yeah, it's interesting. So along the lines, I guess, of a pet bear, what was your funniest story that you came across when you were doing your research and trying to find things for the book?
I think one of the, I mean, I guess it's not, I don't know if it's funny or not, but it's always one that I think, I really appreciated as somebody who writes, was with George Plimpton, who, was a famous writer, and he was really known for his participatory journalism. He was also in Good Will Hunting. He played a psychiatrist in one of those scenes when Matt Damon's character was really trying to not go through with the process. But anyway, Plimpton, he did all sorts of like these stunts, I guess you could say, where he had done some work with the Detroit Lions. He played for the Celtics. He pitched at Yankee Stadium, and he got in net with the Bruins as part of an exhibition game against the Flyers. And it was like an exhibition game. It was maybe 5 minutes before an actual game. And he had practiced with the team so that he could feel comfortable enough to get out on the ice and goalie equipment and get a net. And I think he almost got a shot from Reggie Leach, who was known as the Rifle because he had quite the slap shot. But somehow Leach wasn't able to fire off the shot, and Plimpton was able to get out of that exhibition game unscathed. And so I love that story too, because like, you'd never see anything like that happen now, right? I think that was obviously a product of its time and its era, where teams would be willing to do these things with them, and potentially put somebody like George at risk by putting him on the ice with NHL players. Whether or not Reggie would have shot at full blast, we're not entirely sure, but still, you're taking a risk getting on the ice, doing that kind of stuff. So I get a chuckle at stuff like that, where again, it's just a unique thing, and then certainly something that, if I had the chance, I would do it. But certainly I think teams have thought better of letting guys like me on the ice to do stuff like that.
Of course, one of the parts of the year is summertime, and it's not a lot of hockey, so that can be a challenge. But you did have, I guess, some good fortune, if we can say it, from COVID, is that they played during the summer. So there are some tidbits there from when they played actual real hockey in August.
Yeah, there's certainly a silver lining there. Because now all of a sudden, like, you get to the dog days of summer in late July and August, and there's often a trade or a transaction that's happening. But when you're focusing on one team only, there's some days when maybe a lot didn't happen, and so I either had to rely on birthdays, which I typically try to shy away from, just because it's I don't want to say it's cheap to just do a birthday, but
that's on the desk calendar, Mike.
I know
every desk calendar ever published.
Yeah, people make a living out of that, but I just thought that there's a better story out there. But I use the birthdays as an entry point to kind of tell a different story about a player who might not have otherwise have been featured. But yes, to your point, like when they're playing those games in August of 2020, now you've got a little bit more meat on the bone, where you can include a story about a game, in August, when you're otherwise kind of like looking for an on paper transaction or move, or a birthday of a player, right? So definitely a silver lining. Hopefully we don't ever have to do that again, but it came in handy for these last couple of books, that's for sure.
Do you have a favorite story that didn't make the book?
Oh, no, because I mean, I guess there's always a moment after the book is published, and I try not to go back and look at it, just because I'm locked into it. There's really nothing I could do at this point. And there's always going to be a moment, I think, in any, author's life, when you'll go back and you'll be like, I forgot that this happened that same day, but I was so fixated on this one moment that I just went with that anyway, and I had blinders on. And maybe if I could go back and redo it, I would have put something else into it. But I think for the most part, I've really tried to pick things that I think are interesting or important, right? Certainly, I think as a historian, like what I think is going to be very different from, your interpretation of important Bruins moments, especially knowing the fact that I didn't grow up, with the team in the same way that you did, but I did my best to try to find historically significant moments and then pick moments that I think just, Bruins fans will appreciate, right? So there's moments where I think certainly you've got like, Phil Esposito getting traded to the Bruins, which is obviously a seismic trade that changed the fortunes of the franchise. But then I've got stories in there about like, Torrey Krug's helmetless hit, like on Robert Thomas in the Cup final, just because like that's such an iconic moment. And obviously, if it would have ended a little bit differently, that that could be a statue. But like just the old school look of that, like we've got stories like that that are a little more lighthearted, maybe not very historically significant, but certainly I think hopefully something that will resonate with the fans, because certainly a lot of these ones, even for me, like this is something where I'm just like, I know this moment off, like instantly it's got to go in the book.
So what's the next 365? I mean, you're going to stay original 6 or?
That's the question. Because certainly we already know that the publisher wants me to do Wings 365. They've, I pushed that off to do the Bruins book. I think for me, like the Wings would be a logical place to go next. And then from there, like there is, you could make an argument that I should go back to Canada and I could do a Canucks 365. Certainly there's no shortage of on ice, off ice moments in that team's history, from losing the draft initially on the roulette wheel to everything that's happened, in the last few years. And then of course, Edmonton's been around for a long time, going back to their WHA days before they joined the NHL. But it's there's something I think about, like finishing off the original 6, that would be a good feather in the cap. And then from there, I've obviously got, 28, not 28, but like 25 more teams that we could do, or 26 more teams that we could do after that. So like I could spend, I think someone just wrote Utah Mammoth. Like that's, by the time I get to the Utah Mammoth in 26 years, yes, there'll be a nice,
there'll be more meat on the bone.
There'll be more meat on the bone there, and then you could do Utah 365 or Mammoth 365 in 2050.
And all the Atlanta franchises, just like put them all together.
They'll probably have another one by then too.
Yeah, probably will.
You can do Flames, Thrashers, and whatever this next iteration is. Combine them all.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So before we let you go, let's get into some Leafs talk. And it's perfect timing. Bruins have Leafs back-to-back Saturday and Tuesday. I guess they're still navigating through the loss of Mitch Marner and, trying to find some, Austin Matthews struggled early. The Bruins have the Maple Leafs first-round pick in this upcoming draft. And initially you think, well, it's late 20s at best. But now, I mean, is it possible that this thing gets off the rails a little bit and maybe miss the playoffs?
I think it's with the Leafs, it's always possible that it could go off the rails. Like it's always possible. And then you have a night like you had the other night where they're down 3-0 in the third period and they discover that, hey, we can still play hockey, and they score 4 straight goals and they win the game. And that's like the frustration of being a Leafs fan, because that's something that they could do in any year, it seems, where they go into these games, they never start on time, they look listless through often the first 2 periods, and then they can come alive in the third period and they could, put a team to bed. And whether or not the Penguins are a good indication of what the Leafs are at this point, it's tough to say. But yeah, that is a genuine concern. I think, especially as I think they're coming out of their skid, and I think they're adjusting to what life looks like, with this team now. But as a Leafs fan who's been there for a lot of highs and lows, mostly the lows, especially over the last little while, predating the arrival of the core 4, like anything is possible. And so honestly, if there was a season where they would miss the playoffs, it could certainly be this one. It could also be, after this conversation, they figure it out and they adjust to their new life. For me, going into the season, I always felt as though and I was trying to talk myself into it, that they'd be better off without Marner, not in the sense that I wanted him gone, but I just felt like they got to close the book on this, move on. He needs to move on, and we'll get through this. It was never a question of that they can't perform in the regular season. Where they would really find out how this change looks is in the playoffs. but they got to get to the playoffs. And so I
Sure.
think it's really going to be interesting. I think right now when we hopped on, they're tied 2-2 with Utah. So we'll see. Again, Mammoth 365 where that takes us tonight. But
this could be the day. This could be the day in history.
So I mean, it would be the ultimate thing though, where if the Leafs, Bruins have the pick, the Leafs end up finishing low and then they forfeit that pick to the Bruins. I mean, it also kind of hurts me a little bit to see Fraser Minton, like he's, I think it was a move that they had to make to shore up the defense that they got with Carlos. So obviously that's a good move. It's an important move, but as a fan of the Leafs and, you're going to watch that, player progress and think, maybe that could be the one that got away later, but depending on what they do in between now and then, it may work out for everybody, but it may not.
Yeah, we're kind of hoping that this draft pick turns into like a Tuukka Rask for Andrew Raycroft.
Yeah, Andrew Raycroft. There you go.
That's what we're looking for.
That would be really cool.
That'd be great because we need it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike, it's great to have you on. We highly recommend the book. It's really fun read. It's really cool information. Brought back a lot of memories, especially in the 80s and 90s growing up as a kid and watching Bruins hockey, and brought, you forget a lot as you get older, and it really took me back. So we really appreciate it, and we wish you the best of luck on the next book.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Mike Commito with Bruins 365.